Our next panel today continues on the theme of what it means to kind of live in water by looking at the ways that Louisianans express their understanding of water through art, literature, music, and design. Entitled Representations of Water, the panel includes Michael Eble, who was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. He received a BFA degree in painting from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and an MFA degree in painting and drawing from the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. He is currently curator of events and exhibitions for the College of Arts at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. He recently relocated back to Louisiana from Minnesota, where he was an associate professor of studio art and curator of the Edward J. and Helen Jean Morrison Gallery at the University of Minnesota, Morris, for 13 years. He has shown his paintings and works on papers in numerous regional and national solo and group exhibitions, most recently in Louisiana, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. Eble was recently awarded an Arts Park grant from the Acadiana Center for the Arts in 2016. Prior to this award, he had also been the recipient of several Imagine Fund Awards and Grant and Aid Awards from the University of Minnesota, along with a residential fellowship in 2008 from the Institute for Advanced Study, and additional grants and research funding from the McKnight Foundation, Lake Regional Arts Council, Vermont Studio Center, Science Museum of Minnesota, and the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. Eble produces abstract paintings that focus on the element of water and its relationships to humans and the environment. After that, we will have Mark DeWitt, who is the author of the Cajun and Zydeco dance music in Northern California, Modern Pleasures in a Postmodern World book published by the University Press of Mississippi in 2008. He holds the Dr. Tomi Como Endowed Chair in Traditional Music at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, where he directs an undergraduate curriculum and degree program in traditional music, especially Cajun and Creole French music. He completed his doctoral studies at UC Berkeley in ethnomusicology, and as an undergraduate at MIT, he majored in urban planning, concentrating in energy and environmental policy. Last up on the day, we'll have the team of Emery McClure Architecture, Christy Sheremy and Sarah Young, which is composed of active practitioners who also teach design. The four collaborators have over 50 years of experience in design, construction, and instruction, and they have all participated in, exhibited, and been acknowledged for their design projects. When working as a collaborative, they focus on competitive speculative work that investigates humans' relationship with their changing environment. Making up Emery McClure Architecture is Michael McClure, a professor of architecture and the associate dean for the UL Lafayette College of the Arts, Ursula Emery McClure, who is the A. Hayes Town Professor of Architecture at LSU's School of Architecture, Sarah Young, an assistant professor for UL Lafayette School of Architecture and Design, and Christy Sheremy, who is an associate professor of landscape architecture at the OSU Knowlton School. For the work they will present today, the team will be joined by the fiction author Moira Crone, whose previous book, The Not Yet, is a dystopian coming-of-age set on a ravaged Gulf Coast in 2121, complemented the design project. Praised for its environmental prescience and literary voice, it is a finalist for the Philip K. Dick Award for Best Science Fiction Paperback of the Year in 2013. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker of the day, Mark DeWitt.
Thanks, Liz, and to the Center for Louisiana Studies for hosting this event. Consider for a moment the situation of a creative artist who sets out to write a song or create some other kind of soundscape to voice political protest. How much credit or responsibility can that artist take for moving people to action? In his New York Times obituary, singer-activist Pete Seeger was quoted, "My job is to show folks there's a lot of good music in this world, and if used right, it may help to save the planet." At the heart of Seeger's statement seems to be the concept of efficacy. For music to be used right, It must contribute significantly to an intended political outcome. And if it fails to do so, either it wasn't used right or it wasn't good music to begin with. I will explore here the concept of good music as that which moves hearts and minds of listeners to imagine a different world and to engage politically in the direction the artist intended. I will draw from music created in response to coastal wetlands loss in Louisiana and to the 2010 BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. There will be time today to hear excerpts of only a few of these, more than 24 I've found so far. A key premise of the paper, shared by songwriters whom I interviewed, is that there has been a failure of political will to modify or regulate the human behaviors that created these environmental problems in the first place, especially behaviors related to the fossil fuels industry. Rather, the art of the possible has reigned in the form of technical fixes, e.g. coastal restoration engineering projects, and legal settlements in the case of the BP oil spill. I invite you all here today to corroborate or challenge this premise in discussion afterwards. The fundamental question here is, given that music has played such a vital part of past political movements, why has it had such little effect in this case? And just like the plankton in the Dr. Stouffer's presentation, I'm not going to have time to talk about it. It's a semiotic theory that underlies this talk, but you can ask me about it later. While she did not look at music as part of her study, sociologist Arlie Hochschild researched political frames of reference in her 2016 book, Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right. She interviewed some 40 conservative voters in South Louisiana and interviewed several other experts and officials in an attempt to understand what she calls a great paradox, namely the coexistence of, quote, great pollution and great resistance to regulating polluters, end quote, a trend that she confirmed with her own and others' quantitative research. From these interviews, she synthesized what she called a deep story, a term apparently of her own coining. Quote, a deep story is a feels as if story. It's the story that feelings tell in the language of symbols. It removes judgment. It removes fact. It tells us how things feel. Such a story permits those on both sides of the political spectrum to stand back and explore this subjective prism through which the party on the other side sees the world, end quote. The key metaphor of Hochschild's conservative South Louisiana deep story is a line of people extending up a hill, waiting for their turn at the American dream. The subject position of the deep story is described in the second person. Quote, you are situated in the middle of this line, along with others who are also white, older, Christian, and predominantly male. And in principle, some with college degrees, some with not. Many in the back of the line are people of color, poor, young and old, mainly without college degrees. It's scary to look back. There are so many behind you, and in principle, you wish them well. Still, you waited a long time, and the line is barely moving. You deserve to move forward a little faster. You're patient but weary. You focus ahead, especially on those at the very top of the hill, end quote. But in multiple cases of gross unfairness, the federal government is letting others cut in line in front of you, even, and I quote again, the brown pelican, unbelievably standing ahead of you in line as a brown pelican fluttering its long, oil-drenched wings. The brown pelican was at one time nearly wiped out by chemical pollution, but in 2009, it was removed from the endangered species list the year before the 2010 BP oil spill. To keep surviving, it now needs clean fish to eat, clean water to dive in, oil-freed marshes, and protection from coastal erosion. That's why it's in line ahead of you, but really, it's just an animal, and you're a human being, end quote. From the perspective of the conservative deep story, it is not difficult to understand how the message of Steve Riley and the Mamou Playboys' 2010 post-spill album cover and the three songs that Zachary Richard wrote or co-wrote in response to the BP oil spill from the points of view of various birds, Le Pélican, Le Grand Gosier, and Le Fou, fell largely on deaf ears. Putting oneself in the place of an oil-slicked bird is out of the question. That bird should get to the back of the line, end of deep story. Further compounding the lack of communication is the language barrier. Just over 2% of Louisiana's population are now French speakers. I would like to play for you now clips from two Zachary Richard recordings. The lunging 6/8 pulse and the long cello lines of Richard's Le Pélican provide an effective oral icon of birds in flight who, according to co-writer Emricall, who sings the verse, are heading out of Louisiana, never to return. Following, in The Levee Broke, the language barrier is removed for English speakers in a post-Katrina song that references a former U.S. Senator from Louisiana, Democrat John Breaux, coastal erosion, and Randy Newman's song about the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927.
Toujours le cas, ce matin j'en ai vu 4 repartir. Woke up Monday morning and I saw it on TV. High water flowing in the streets of New Orleans. All of the president called up in Baton Rouge. All they said was the levee's done broken, ain't nothing they could do. The levee broke way down in the back, the levee broke down in front of you. Seems like the whole damn world is sinking. I must be sinking too. Somebody call out a warning. Somebody come to my rescue. Like I'm gonna have to start swimming if I wanna make it back to you.
In The Levee Broke are several elements of what Hochschild identifies as the counterpart to the conservative deep story, namely a progressive deep story that is sort of an updated version of Garrett Hardin's classic Tragedy of the Commons. The Commons, a public square, represents government programs and construction projects created for the public good. Tragedy comes when, quote, marauders invade the public square, recklessly dismantle it, and selfishly steal away bricks and concrete chunks from the public buildings at its center. Seeing insult added to injury, those guarding the public square watch helplessly as those who've dismantled it construct private McMansions with the same bricks and pieces of concrete, privatizing the public realm, end quote. The levee, part of this prized public infrastructure, has failed, and the songwriter looks to the president, the federal government, to answer. Musically, a group of backup singers during the chorus repeats the words, "The levee broke," timbrely evoking a black gospel choir and by extension the civil rights era, when black churches and their music were integral to an effective political movement. The stately pace and serious subject matter of both Le Pélican and The Levee Broke signal the genre of the anthem, and with it, and with the gospel element, especially a civil rights anthem such as We Shall Overcome. Only in this case, there is no vision of a future that could be, only devastation. Singer-songwriter Drew Landry, a generation younger than Richard, has not focused directly on the environment so much as on behalf of commercial fishermen whose traditional livelihood depends on a healthy ecosystem. Whether calculated or not, the focus on local residents and their means of livelihood as opposed to the fate of wildlife in the ecosystem is a strategic attempt to enlist the support of the conservative population of this region, where work, not the public welfare, is a core value. The clip of the song I'll play highlights sport and commercial fishing as well as acceptance of the oil industry as a part of the economy. Following that will be a clip from another Louisiana singer-songwriter, Mike Dean, featuring the only song I've found so far protesting environmental regulation. In this case, the moratorium on the deep-sea oil spill drilling that President Obama imposed during and immediately after the BP oil spill.
Grew up on the southern shore, Louisiana, now there ain't no more. Kicking mud up off a crawfish hole, barefooted with a fishing pole, make a living with my own two hands. And yes, part of being who I am, gone back into the oil field. That's the only way to pay our bills. If I'm lucky, I could have a son, take him hunting like his daddy done, get him working on a fishing boat, up and down the Gulf of Mexico.
All I have got to say is you're all living in. And every name you ought to hear every day on CNN. It's a way of life. Down here on the go. It ain't always pretty, but it's good to us. 'Cause when a coal mine caves in, you don't shut them all down. Don't ban airplanes every time one hits the ground. You see it on TV, and it looks like hell. You give us the tools and the time, and we'll fix it ourselves.
This song reinforces the themes from Hochschild's book in almost every couplet, such as tolerating a life that ain't pretty in exchange for jobs, trust in the private sector over the federal government, and aversion to government handouts. And while the songwriter is voicing prevailing local opinion, as I heard it expressed in 2010, he is also speaking his truth to a power that remained unperturbed, consistent with the frame of the solo singer-songwriter protesting with an acoustic guitar. More could be said about conservative strategies to appropriate progressive means of persuasion to different political ends. Time does not permit me to delve further into different interpretive frames provided by Louisiana dance music genres, such as Cajun two-steps and waltzes and New Orleans second-line music, which round out the picture to show a range of emotional responses to disaster comparable to what Noriko Manabe has described in the aftermath of the 2011 Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan. In her analysis, Manabe argues that both presentational and participatory approaches to music can be effective in political protest, but adds that dance music raises a potential mismatch between a serious political message and a carefree party medium. This problem is unconvincingly dismissed by Tab Benoit in a YouTube interview as not applicable to Louisiana. With respect to Pete Seeger's formulation, did the obituary writer enshrine this quote simply as a suitably gnomic statement by a respected elder that encapsulates his life work, or is there actual wisdom here? In the course of writing this paper, I have concluded that some of the music I discussed today may not be good enough, and some of it may not have been used right, but also that in Louisiana, the burden of skillful means in shifting the debate about environmental policy and economic development is especially high. Timing and circumstances are not in environmental activists' favor. Thank you for your attention.
Our next presenter is Michael Ebley. Sorry, I say it wrong every time. My apologies.
right, thanks for everybody for coming out today, and thanks for the Center for Louisiana Studies. I don't know, this is kind of, I don't know, I'm an artist, and so I'm going to talk a lot about images, and that's who I am, and that's my field of study. And like I said in my bio that Liz read, I grew up in Louisiana, and then I had a 13-year hiatus in which I lived and worked in Minnesota, which certainly gave me a lot of perspective for good and bad about Louisiana. But also being in Minnesota, I was able to kind of draw a lot of different connections. Minnesota is very similar to Louisiana, that one, their population is very densely populated by people that have grown up there and never left. Two, it's the land of 1,000 lakes, and you have that relationship with water, that people go to it every summer or all the time. And so, you know, they think they're a sportsman's paradise also. So a lot of times I'll talk about my time in Minnesota a little bit and connecting back to Louisiana. So I grew up in Jefferson Parish, right outside New Orleans in Metairie. And these are two kind of aerial images, and I'll talk about the importance of an aerial viewpoint to my work in a minute or so. But I like this little picture here, in which it almost seems like the Mississippi River is a whole other body of water. But what it makes me think about is just how wide this little area of land is here. And then, you know, you have Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi here. And then this is the little neighborhood that I grew up in, right here, Bridgedale subdivision. And I often think about my childhood, in which I would ride my bike here to Lake Pontchartrain, which I think is only like right under a mile. And then I could ride my bike all the way to the Mississippi River, which would be maybe 1.5 miles or 2 miles. But I kind of wanted to go in Google Maps and figure all this out. But I think about, you know, this isn't a big swath of land that's surrounded by a major body of water and the major river that runs through the United States. And it was great to have a great childhood to kind of grow up around these bodies of water. I ride my bike all around Lake Pontchartrain, ride the levees of the Mississippi all the way into the French Quarter. And so I very much have this nostalgic appeal to New Orleans pre-Katrina. And even, you know, before Katrina in '95, I would say my parents had a Katrina where in May of '95, they had 27 inches of water fall on New Orleans and Jefferson Parish. And, you know, that was more disastrous to my family when we had a foot of water in our house than Katrina ever was. So, you know, as a child, I knew, or a teenager at that point, I knew the power of water and the horrible qualities it can inflict on a population and residents. Another kind of thing thinking about my childhood in this area was that when I was 8 years old, I got to go to the 1984 World's Fair. I don't know, anybody else been to the World's Fair? I'm just curious how many people were, okay, just making sure. So, I mean, from an adult perspective, you're like, it was a disaster for the economy, da-da-da-da. But think about it as an 8-year-old boy. You know, it was amazing to me to see the space shuttle and see the treasures of the Vatican. And I can remember I went with a childhood friend, and they let us just run through that fair and do whatever we wanted. And the whole theme of the fair was the rivers of the world. And so every country, just you know, not all of them, had some type of pavilion that dealt with water, and specifically a river. And I can remember going to the Canadian pavilion and seeing this film, and it's called The Journey of a River. And it was one of the first IMAX films, and it started with a trickle of water, and then it followed these rivers through Canada, across Canada, and then you're in the middle of this gushing river. And it was shot with an IMAX camera on a helicopter. And, you know, as an 8-year-old boy, these memories were just ingrained in me. And continue to kind of think about my love of water and how it relates to my paintings. So as a professor at the University of Minnesota Morris in the fall of summer 2007, I had a grant and aid that allowed me to return to Louisiana for the summer and do a series of aerial tours with a private plane that that covered southeastern Louisiana, central southern Louisiana, and eventually southwestern Louisiana along the coast. And what I did was I documented the coastline and had maybe over 500, 600 images that I used as stimuli for paintings. And with kind of the sole purpose to use my paintings to inform people, especially in the Midwest, of what coastal erosion was and what was happening. They certainly, it's kind of neat to talk about some of the speakers before and make connections. You know, Midwest farmers, you know, a lot of their runoff ends up in that Mississippi, which ends up in our dead zone. But also they knew the importance of the Mississippi River, especially when it shut down during Katrina, and things like soybean and corn could not make it to port. And so I had some really great conversations about these works and the importance of protecting the coast and the river and how it applied to their livelihoods. This is 2007, and I'm going to kind of give you a little 10-year span of where I am and where I end up here. But these are all small works on paper, about 8 by 10. And the titles are South of Houma 3, and then Bayou Terrebonne, and then Cocodrie North. And you know, one of the things kind of going back that really inspired me, one, you know, when you live away from family that are struggling from Katrina, you have a lot of sense of guilt. You know, you think about things of picking up and moving back, and there were certainly people that did that. But also, you know, what can you do as an artist to help the cause, even though you live halfway across the country? Also, I can remember one night I was watching C-SPAN, and it was Book TV, and they had Mike Tidwell, who wrote Bayou Farewell, and another author, and they were talking on Book TV about coastal Louisiana. And I remember it spanned to the crowd watching them, and like Tom Brokaw was front and center, just, you know, kind of getting as much information from them. And I can remember just watching that at night, and it kind of led me to Mike Tidwell's book. And one thing that stood out in that book was his interview or his chapter with Carrie St. Pierre, who said, you know, if you're going to understand what's happening in coastal Louisiana, you need to see it from the air. And that's what kind of led me to kind of become an aerial abstract painter, aerial landscape painter with abstract tendencies. These are some other larger pieces that are 30 by 40, all acrylic. The one on the left is Bald Cypress Wetland. The one on the right is Bayou Caillou. And, you know, for me, again, it's capturing what the landscape looks like in paint and kind of informing my viewers of location specifically and some of the problems. Certainly I could use like the bald cypress painting to talk about how cypress trees react, you know, freshwater versus saltwater. This one's Port Fourchon and Highway 1 camps. Talk about the importance of the oil and gas industry to Louisiana and how the importance to the energy to the United States. This is Buras, Chauvin, Empire, and then encroaching shore with Mississippi in the background. Certainly after reading Mike Tidwell's book, you know, when you hear about all these small towns and their history, I wanted to be able to see each one of them from the air. These are all about 16 by 20 acrylic on canvas. And certainly Grand Isle, and then Highway 1 erosion on the right. This is Delta anatomy. So, you know, certainly a lot of these can be, you know, not a specific area in the Delta. I guess, you know, I could go back and go through the photographs and figure it out. Viewers or people that looked at the work, they like to gravitate towards a certain place and have that nostalgic and connection to the place. For me, it was about just kind of informing and letting viewers know what's going on in these certain areas. And again, from that aerial viewpoint, so they have a full understanding of what's happening. This is a series of monotypes. A monotype is when you paint on a piece of plastic or glass, and I was using oil paints, and then you run it through a press, in which it gives you a kind of a one-shot edition, one print. And so I already had this built-up kind of landscape vocabulary, and so it was easy for me to kind of create a whole other series of works in this printing method. And so we have Ponochens on the left, and moving to the right, Bayou Terrebonne again, Highway 56, and again, Bald Cypress. This is, the exhibit ended up in Lafayette, and this was Grand Contemporary Gallery that used to be downtown. The space is still there, it's an exhibition space, but at this time it was called Grand Contemporary. And it can kind of give you a sense of scale, but there's also some other images. Also during this time, when I was producing this work, I had the fellowship at the Institute for Advanced Research at the University of Minnesota. And one nice thing about that is that every day I was in this cohort of academics from all different fields. And we'd be able, they would visit my studio and we'd be able to talk about things. And also, I got to meet some pretty important people, and I had a lunch with Walter Mondale, which was a big deal, and to kind of talk about Louisiana to these people. And then from there, from 2007, and this is 2009, the work continued to kind of spread out in different groups and exhibitions. This is Environs Examined. This was in New Orleans in 2009. And then this is a whole kind of other body of work called Aerial Perspectives. I felt like I spent so much time on the southeastern part of the state that I kind of ignored this region. And so a lot of these are images, Cameron Parish, Lake Charles, the Chafalaya Basin, Pecan Island. The little one on the left is the Chafalaya Basin. And then another exhibit in Minneapolis, again, kind of reaching out to people in my area of the world and kind of telling the story of Louisiana and its relationship with the coast. A nice thing with this was, this gallery dealer, he had no problem with showing landscapes of Louisiana in downtown Minneapolis, and he actually paired me with a photographer from the University of Florida. This is Daniel Carrico, who was already photographing areas on the coast. And so there was this nice relationship between architecture and the landscape, and vice versa. Another exhibit is called Minnesota Real at Winona State University, which is right on the Mississippi in Winona, Minnesota. He kind of equated this to realism, which in a way it is. And so this is Pecan Island, or that kind of vast area there. My painting technique very much became a little more organic, a lot more spilling of paint, less use of a brush stroke. And then these are images of the different highways and roads that surround the southwestern area. They're all about 30 by 40. These were done on wood panels. So we're up to about 2012. I decided I really needed to take a break from Louisiana, and I'm sure some of y'all have those feelings times that you want to get away during the summer and see something new. And so I'd never been to France. And so this was kind of, I'll just show you one or two slides. This was a series called Une Fleur Reflections. There was a small town, actually the research grant was about visiting impressionistic landmarks along the Seine River, which ends up spilling out between two cities. One is Le Havre, the other one is Une Fleur. And, you know, I was really kind of just searching for some type of inspiration. And through this trip, you know, the waters in this port area were so reflective. I kind of focused on just this port and just the photographs I took. And so these are some small works on paper. But I was kind of like pulling back and just focusing on these the reflective qualities. Though people really enjoyed seeing the vessels and the boats and the paintings, I was very much into the type of striations and the distortion and abstraction that happens with water. You know, once you go to the Normandy coast, you always feel the need, you want to go to the south of France. And so the following summer, I ended up in the south of France for a number of weeks. This is a small piece, 24 by 24 works on paper called Riviera. And so this is on the coast of Nice. And then the work changes. You know, I'm more looking at using striation patterns within landscapes. Certainly my color palette opens up. And then I started to think about the meditative qualities of water within the striated patterns. And certainly I saw that in France with the Unfleur works, but I do remember sitting in the middle of winter in this water amusement, indoor water park. And I could see the sun dropping down and the reflective qualities that were on the swimming pool. And it made me just think of, I'd say this painting, which is called Morning Breakthrough, kind of started a whole new series of just thinking about the striations and reflective quality, again, of water, but through these abstract striations. And so I really ran with this for, 2014 up to 2015. This is another exhibit in Minneapolis. This is a piece called Itasca, so it's about 60 by 60 inches. Which really kind of makes me think again about the connections between Minnesota and Louisiana. So the Mississippi actually starts in Itasca here, which is 2,552 miles from the Gulf here. And so here's the three passes, the end of the Mississippi River as it reaches the Gulf. And so it's kind of this, creatively my lifeline has been connected to this river and the things that happen along it. If you ever get a chance, Itasca State Park is just this wonderful state park to visit, to see the headwaters of the Mississippi. And then, another kind of fun project, and yet definitely 2015, was I had these friends, these curators that own this thing called the Traveling Museum. And this is a fish house, and this is Green Lake in the middle of February on Mardi Gras Day 2015. And then this is a Minnesota Public Television, and they're doing a little excerpt here. So I had an art show within this fish house here, and it was called Gumbo Yaya Gree, which is Dr. John song. Mark at. But, and then I served gumbo to everybody that came out. And I always say, man, if I would have had the Lost Bayou Ramblers there, it really would have been terrific. But I should start a whole music festival there during the winter time. But, so in the fall of 2016, I had the opportunity to return to Louisiana permanently. And so, when you move, it's a new studio, it's a new body of work, what are you going to do? And I returned to looking at the Louisiana landscape or the Louisiana coastal landscape. I wasn't really, I guess the way to define this current work is that I'm using kind of a collective history and memory. One, I'm using all this aerial footage, but I'm not really going back to it. I'm kind of thinking about it in my head, but I'm also thinking about how I abstract water in the terms of the other previous bodies of work within France. And so this is the first piece I produced when I moved back in 2016. It's called Rampart. and it's 42 by 60 inches. Two other images, view from the Albatross on the left, and then River Dance on the right. So I'm kind of dropping behind, giving the viewer an exact location, and I'm thinking, again, collectively, of what makes up our southern coastal landscape of Louisiana, and all the beauty of what happens in a meander and the bends of the Mississippi River, but also the areas along the coast. Also thinking about land development. There's earlier maps of the Mississippi River. I'm sure a lot of y'all are familiar with I think it's Howard Fisk's work. But there's also a book called Charting Louisiana, in which you can see kind of the plantations along the Mississippi and how they're divided up. This is a coastal byway. Meander on the left and straight bayou on the right. Dual expressway and wetland memory. So a lot of this work, a couple more pieces here. Bifurcation, Big Bend in the middle there, and river economy on the right. So the majority of these pieces, they were in preparation for an exhibition I had at a gallery in New Orleans. It's Claire Elizabeth Galleries, the gallery. This is actually Claire walking through here, and she loves this Times-Picayune photograph. Kind of the sad part about this exhibition, it opened the Saturday of the Lafayette floods, and so I wasn't even able to make the opening. And so when, again, you work your tail off to produce stuff, you come out, and you weren't even able to go to the opening because we were flooded in here, and but the reality, I'm making paintings about this delicate relationship, and it generally affects you, your home, your car. And so a couple of images here, sense of scale. So I've kind of continued working within this direction, often trying to add more color and thinking more about land usage, thinking about how man-made structures, land development interfere with a landscape or Louisiana landscape, organic mark making versus structural and geometric mark making, and again, thinking about the delicate balance that we deal with day in and day out here. These are all from 2017, so these are just a couple months old. Coastal passages. And then these are larger pieces. This is Coastal Landscape Center, and then Coastal Landscape Right. And I guess in summary, I think about myself within this caveat of all these landscape painters, and of course I'm a former student of Elmore Morgan, who's like, the contemporary landscape painter for Louisiana. And I watch so many landscape painters in this area, and I think one thing I'm trying to, it's easy to make beautiful work about the beautiful sunsets that happen here and the beautiful environment. But I think everybody knows in this room, it's a much more complicated environment that we live in. And I think I'm thinking about a lot of those different issues, and I'm trying to put that complexity within these abstract paintings. And I hope that, though people who engage the work, they want a full understanding, they want to know a location, and I try to talk to them that it's a location in my head that takes in all these different informations and all these different issues that everyone's talking about this morning and try to make a visual representation of it. So I was happy this past summer to be accepted in an exhibit called the Louisiana Contemporary. So this piece is currently hanging in the Ogden right now. And certainly positive news that keeps you producing work and engaged in your creative practice. And so this is a catalog and an image of it at the Ogden. Thank you.
Our next presentation is actually a group presentation by Emery McClure Architecture, as well as Sarah Young and Christy Sheremy, in spotlighting Moira Crone as well. So I'm going to turn it over to them to kind of introduce themselves as a group and also what they'll be speaking about.
All right, thank you. This is a large collaborative project, so we're just going to do some round robin. It's actually not Emery McClure Architecture that did this. It's another firm we call EMC and Young, which is a firm that was started 5 years ago, in order to start studying in a very speculative way the way human beings interact with their built environment and with infrastructure. Okay.
This is Michael, by the
I'm
way.
sorry. I'm Michael McClure.
This is Sarah Young, I'm Ursula, and this is the author Moira Crone, just so you know who we are when we get up to speak.
Where's the next button? Okay. In the not-so-distant future, increased storm action and 1 meter sea level rise will inundate the barrier plain and place New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles, and Houston on the Gulf of Mexico. Our multidisciplinary design team, EMC and Young, sees this problem not as a possibility, but as an inevitability, an impending reality. When the sea level rises and the distance between the disparate conditions of the city and the sea disappears, how will the built environment and human occupation respond? What happens when the remote becomes the proximate? What is the architecture of the shifting ecotone? And what modes can be used to envision it in a future which has not yet materialized? How does a practice leverage the landscape when the landscape itself is changing?
Which button? These are the questions explored by Coastal Caretakers, a speculative project which envisions a repurposing of the infrastructure left exposed after sea level rise for the dual purpose of human occupation and coastal care. Several such structures, as elevated highways, bridges, train trestles, etc., exist along the flood-endangered Gulf Coast. Bridges and other structures left protruding from the risen water would be fitted with nets to capture the sediment deposits of the Mississippi over time. These deposits are layered, treated, and planted, and then redeposited to actuate the formation of barrier islands. And just a side note, this project was submitted for an international design competition, which it won the grand prize of this system based on this work here, which is, I guess, one of the ways we've been talking about how does this work get farther than ourselves, where only we who are looking at our own concerns, and this is one of our ways of trying to do that. This environmental adaptation initiates regrowth of the coastal plain, the storm-proofer for these communities. The caretakers of this operation live out in this remote, isolated water world, tending the nets and farming the recaptured soil.
As a speculative project, its primary purpose was not problem solving through architecture, but instead an act of problem defining through multiple disciplinary lenses. The lenses of infrastructure, agriculture, landscape ecology, and architecture. Speculative projects have long been a means for architects to explore yet unrealized futures, with notable examples dating back to the Enlightenment and continuing up to current day. However, the audience for such projects is usually very, very limited. So this project actually found another life and another audience when novelist Moira Crone wrote a fable called Ovala, inspired by and set in this new world created by the Coastal Caretaker Project. Ovala is the story of a young girl caught between seemingly incompatible worlds, between the wild and the tame, between the natural and the man-made, and between the city and the sea. It imagines what the future looks like when inevitably the lines between those worlds become blurred. The story weaves layers of allegorical meaning, reaching a moral conclusion about the danger of over-categorizing, oversimplifying, of seeing things as black and white and unchangeable. Ovala made a speculative design project more universally accessible through one of the most enduring forms of folk literature, the fable. Stories are universal and have the potential to communicate to a wide audience. Allegory has been used throughout history to highlight the folly of humans and to allow the interpretation of multiple layered realities on several scales. Much like architecture, fables can be read literally, and they can also be read through the lens of representation. So we will now read Maura Crone's Fable of Ovala with supporting images created by the EMC and Young team.
Ovala. Once upon a time, in the place where land and sea met, a woman laid an egg with a baby inside. The infant was within the shell for many days, until one morning when she woke with a terrible emptiness in her chest. Thrashing around, she cracked her home and burst through. She discovered she was in a nest, on stilts, above water, with a beautiful mother watching her. Her people, the caretakers of the coast, marveled to see her and called her Ovala. When word spread of her unusual birth, the vizier from the walled city appeared. In his deep voice, he said he'd have to take Ovala for a while. "Stay right here," he commanded her mother. "I'll get a cradle. She doesn't belong in a nest." Her mother took Ovala in a narrow boat and rowed out into the wide waters. Lying on her back, the child saw the grasses of the marsh and a great heron high above following them. Dark square clouds appeared. Her mother came to a platform and tied up the boat. She pulled on a rope to bring one cloud in close. It wasn't a cloud, though, Ovala saw, but a field of green suspended in the sky. Upon the field lived a very old man who was planting. Ovala's mother told the man, "I am hiding from the vizier. He wants my child." "Why?" "To study her," he said. "What for?" "They are curious about everything that happens here," he said. With a great clatter, the vizier arrived in a mechanical bird. He called down as he snatched the child, "Disobedient, you'll never see her again." "Perhaps, perhaps not," said the old man. Ovala's mother wept.
The scholars in the walled city picked Ovala up and put her down and turned her over. They found strange nubs on her shoulder blades, said her hands would be claws, and announced, "We can't study her. There's no category for her. She's too much of one, not enough of the other." The vizier's wife longed for a child, so he brought Ovala home. Ovala loved the couple, even though they were strict. They believed there was only one way to live, in brick boxes on paved streets behind the wall that kept them safe from water, seas, and storms. The earth was always below the sky. There were no patches of green in the air, just parks between the buildings on the ground. Ovala went to those parks every day and played until she was too tired to play anymore. When it rained, she ran out into it. The vizier's wife said she would get sick doing that. And after every cloudburst, the vizier's crew pumped away the puddles quickly as they could. The citizens praised the vizier's men for keeping the streets dry as bones. In school, Ovala learned to sort and separate. Rich was to be kept apart from poor, tall apart from short, loud from soft, great from small, walled city from the coastal lands, dry from wet, many, many rules. Ovala was taught the caretakers of the coast were enchanted or crazy. They lived in houses above the water, traveled everywhere in boats, farmed on soils they caught from the Gulf and suspended their fields in the air like great carpets, roots hanging down. Why not just build a wall? But often Ovala dreamed of earth above sky, of water under land, of horizon upon horizon in layers, of her first mother, of the heron who followed them, and the old man.
The morning she turned 12, Ovala woke feeling an extreme itchiness on her back. In the mirror, she saw dark feathers coming out in two spots between her shoulder blades. She stayed inside her room all day. When the vizier and his wife came in at dusk to check on her, they saw the feathers. Ovala pretended to doze. The vizier said, "No one will accept her like this. We'll wait until they grow out and then cut them away. It will hurt." "Tell them to cut off her feelings then, too," his wife said. When they were gone, Ovala went to her window. Through the shade, she saw huge shadows in a strange greenish sky. Passers-by ran in fright because the heavy clouds burst open. Rains fell harder than ever, flooding streets and parks and houses. The wall began to crack. The vizier's men worked all night repairing it. Eventually, the flood did subside. The vizier said, "The 100-year storms are here. It might not hold next time." That evening, Ovala went to the windowsill again. With her very long fingernails, she slit the shade wide open, threw up the sash. She glimpsed a great heron high above, hovering, but quickly he was gone. She burst through and strolled with glee in the deep puddles still in the streets. She climbed to the top of a building, unfurled her perfect wings, for they had finished growing in the night, and flew south. Soon below her, she saw patches of green suspended above the waters, and fine necklaces of lights in the marshy seas. She'd found her first home. She saw her mother waiting for her with the old man in the suspended field. She settled there as if she'd never left, almost. The caretakers fished and sang, planted the fields. The people called her good luck, and no one trimmed Ovala's wings.
The storms came, stronger and stronger, battering everyone. Where the caretakers lived, the winds were fierce and the water rose. The hanging fields swayed and never fell. The city fared worse, for the wall cracked often. The vizier's men worked for years fixing it, but could never finish the job. Eventually, he grew tired. The couple went looking for Ovala as they longed for her in their old age. Ovala was a young woman now. She missed things about the walled city, the certainty in life, her childhood friends, even how this was always distinct from that. When the couple came, she asked the vizier if they would take away her wings if she were to visit. His wife said, "Just an operation, darling, then you will be a beauty." "No," Ovala's mother said. "She was born with them. Leave her alone." The two mothers were about to come to blows. Ovala was torn, wanting both to be happy. The great heron, who had been watching all this time, flew in at that moment and landed. He was astonishing, with fine white feathers on the sides of his face. He said to the vizier and his wife, "The storm far out in the Gulf coming now is too strong. The only way to save the city is to let the wall crumble, for you will all drown inside it." To the old man he said, "The hanging fields are well established. It's been 100 years. You have cared for the coast and cultivated it. You have built new land. It's time. Lower them. They will protect the city." Her mother said to the vizier, "If Ovala can stay, we'll lower the fields." "How should we live with no wall?" the vizier asked the heron. "With water flowing in and out, your houses besides rivers, canals, otherwise you will perish. I have seen far, and I have seen this." The caretaker took the bargain for love of Ovala. They dropped the hanging fields upon the waters. The vizier's men in the city dug canals and made ponds where the streets and parks were once, and took the wall down. The great storm came. The new land slowed its approach. The walled city let the water in. When it receded, they had survived. When the sun returned to the coast, the caretakers walked out upon the marvel they had created and began again to farm on their new earth this time. Ovala stayed at the coast, but visited the vizier's family often. When all was well, the heron visited her and said, "Where did I click? Let's see. Yes. Okay. Follow me on a world flight. From high above, you will see how one kind of land and life might merge seamlessly with another without tragedy. I'll show a little of the future. It's your destiny to show others." She obeyed. Taking off into the sweet currents of air, she felt home at last, for she was his daughter. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the firm EMC and Young and the author Moira Crone. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so I'm going to open up the floor to Dr. Michael Ebley, Dr. Mark DeWitt, and EMC and Young and Moira Crone. So are there questions? Oh, and I'm going to have you guys come down here for the microphones so that everybody can hear. Sorry about that. Questions for the presenters? Representations of art. All right, awesome, thank you.
This question is for Michael Ebley. So I noticed in your more recent work, there are some gray lines. Is that still acrylic, or are you like?
It's graphite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I use acrylic markers that are, again, liquid acrylic paint. And yeah, I love using architectural tools in my painting practice and straight edges. Yeah.
This is for, is it EMC and Young?
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating take on our coastal problem. Tell us other things that you're doing to arouse public awareness and anything on a, I don't want to say a more practical scale, because it's a real challenge, as you obviously have recognized, to get the public to come to terms with what is going to happen. So can you share with us a little more?
Sure. In my school, where I teach architecture, one of the ways this work has translated into the real work, I think, can you hear me? Or do I need the mic? I can usually speak loud enough for you all to hear. Is that this work has led to various organizations approaching us in the design studios with our students to help them imagine how they're going to move forward in their businesses. So I, because of the work that I've done in the firm with students at LSU, have done projects now for Chevron at their Venice shore-based operations, and also for LumCon, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the Louisiana University's Marine Consortium. We just finished working with their grapple panel because, if you're not aware, the facility, which is owned by all the universities of the state, is currently under 1 foot of sea level once a month at the base of their building, and their employees can't get to the building because of the water in their parking lot. And so they're dealing with it right now as a very current issue. And so that's one of the ways that this speculation is helping real people try to imagine, because it's very hard to imagine a future like this, as much as you know it's here. And so that's one of the ways that the work is spread, at least on my end specifically.
I mean, I would say that, I mean, as an architecture firm, we do build buildings, but I'm going to go back to your question. This is absolutely practical as far as we're concerned. When 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we did a project similar to this after the storms. We were hired by University of Texas. And so it was an urban version of this. It's what to do with the lower Ninth Ward. And in it, the assumption here is that let's use the old bridges. In that one, the assumption was, let's use leaky levees. And everyone thought we were crazy and futuristic. Now, Corps of Engineers uses that term, right? So I think it's just about putting out the obvious. It seems impractical, but it's actually just what we see as very obvious solutions, right? And they are very speculative, and it is science fiction, but there's science in the fiction, right?
A question that I actually had coming from the first session, which I think that you all may have a good answer to, is at what point in Louisiana in our different watershed areas did residential construction go from that pier type up above the ground to slabs everywhere on the ground?
I'd say 1960.
Was it
Yeah,
just
I mean,
from
there
a
wasn't
point
a-
where
there
we
wasn't a
forgot
time.
what we knew before,
Yeah.
and we hadn't had a storm in a while, so everybody started putting slab on ground?
There's a, and there's also, there's insurance changes where certain insurance companies here in the state of Louisiana, for example, you call them to say you have a house that's up on piers, and they say, well, if it's not closed in, we're not insuring it. And so get a slab on grade house, we'll insure it. It's sort of counterproductive, but it is one of the things that changed a lot because it was more affordable and cheaper and easier to get insurance when there wasn't a storm bringing the water, so.
Thank you. This is more of a comment than it is a question. I just am amazed, and I want to thank you all for doing that, for using your art to augment our view and our understanding of water in Louisiana. I think it was terrific. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about who's responsible for the illustration of Ovala, and what kinds of choices you were making there. I think it's a beautiful illustration of that fable, and I wondered how it came to be. I mean, it's just
Right.
Take it from me.
This is we've now, I guess we've been in a relationship now for 4 years, I guess. So Moira and I met because I saw that she had taught at LSU at a point. So I called her, I think I wrote you an email, just randomly.
Yes.
Because I had read her book, The Not Yet, and asked her to work with us on the Chevron project that LSU was doing. And that's when she learned about our Coastal Caretakers project, because we did it, I think, the following year, and it was awarded. And so she was so inspired by that we decided to work on a competition entry for a fairy tale where she wrote the story, and then all of us, the three of us, and then Christy Sheremy, who used to work at LSU and has now gone to Ohio State, worked on the illustrations. And so when we work on the illustrations, we work on them all together. All of our hands touch it at some point. And actually, Ovala is our daughter.
Yeah, all the images of the girl flying, those are all pictures we took
Of my daughter.
of their daughter.
Yeah. So,
One day she's probably going to hate it.
yeah, probably so. Actually, probably today, if she knew we were doing this.
She just started high school, so now is the tipping point where she's going to hate it.
Yeah, pretty much.
What happened was when Ursula told me that she wanted to do do a fairy tale for this competition, I had told her that she'd given a talk at my house actually showing the original images of the people with the coastal caretaker fields above them. And I was thinking about creating a landscape and writing another sci-fi novel set with that landscape somewhere. And so I told her that I was already thinking about that, so then I wrote the fable based on this idea.
She's actually written an entire tween novel. I guess it's almost complete.
Yeah, it's like 130 pages. I've written a longer version.
She's written a longer version of the story.
But
We didn't
actually,
think we'd read
I
that
like
too.
the shorter one better.
You like the shorter one better?
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for our morning session here. So please join me in thanking the presenters for their presentation on the representations of water. So at this point, we are going to break for lunch, which is on your own, and we'll get started with our afternoon sessions at 1 o'clock, which focus on policy, the present, and the future of Louisiana's relationship with water. So thank you.